That day they had been attacking and he had dived into what he thought was a German slit trench, only to discover it was an enemy latrine. Moments later, a shell landed nearby, blinding him and spattering him with shrapnel. So started the streak of bad luck for what must be one of the unluckiest British soldiers to survive the fighting in Normandy. World War II was a horror show of death and destruction, and figures to illustrate this are often cited. An aspect of the unending horror often less focused on was the equal number of people who were wounded in the conflict, with many sustaining lifelong painful injuries and scars. I think more attention is due to this overlooked aspect of war, away from the action and the front lines. Therefore, I want to share this quite astounding true story from the war diary of a young heroic Irish nurse, Mary Morris, who both helped as well as experienced the grim reality of wounded soldiers as they arrived at her medical tent for treatment, just behind the front lines in Normandy, only days after the D-Day landings. It was during these days of fighting near the coast of Normandy that one British soldier embodied the true meaning of courage and resilience in spite of his unbelievable bad streak of luck. This brave shock trooper, despite sustaining terrible wounds, ignored his pain to find his way back to his friends and eventually safety, happily recounting his horrible experiences to the nurses as they patched up what remained of his leg, maintaining his warm personality and pleasant voice, a leg that would subsequently be amputated, mind you. In his book about Normandy, James Holland succinctly summarizes the relevant part of Mary Morris's war diary, writing, "On the 27th of June, a badly wounded Englishman reached the 101st hospital in a terrible state. Blind, stinking, covered in gunshot and shrapnel wounds. Len nonetheless barely stopped talking, and quite cheerfully too, as Mary and her friend Taffy worked on cutting him out of his uniform. He completely ignores the appalling state he is in," she noted. "The British are renowned for their stiff upper lip, but this is ridiculous." He told them what had happened to him. On D-Day, he had nearly drowned after being knocked into the sea. Someone had dragged him out of the water and he had collapsed on the sand next to a dead German. He had been fighting ever since. Then that day they had been attacking and he had dived into what he thought was a German slit trench, only to discover it was an enemy latrine. Moments later, a shell landed nearby, blinding him and splattering him with shrapnel. "Although he is too shocked to realize it yet," wrote Mary, "most of his right leg has been blown off. His face is completely blackened from impacted shrapnel. He had managed to crawl out of the latrine and take shelter by a British tank, shouting for help as he did so. Someone came to his rescue, and together they tied a tourniquet around his thigh. He was then strapped to the bonnet of a Jeep, which was very bumpy, until another shell screamed over and blew the Jeep off the road, with Len still strapped to it. The Jeep was somehow rightened, and incredibly, Len, still alive, was brought to the tented hospital. I fix him up with intravenous plasma and give him a shot of morphine," wrote Mary. "He will need sleep to prepare for major surgery in the morning." In his book, however, James Holland didn't make space for how Len just could not catch a break. The next day, during a German bombing run scare, he was dropped by his orderly stretcher bearers while being transported to the first of a series of operations he would eventually have. The responsible commanding officer heard the shouts of Len, who was in terrible pain, and had to force the orderlies at gunpoint, with shrapnel flying around them from the attack, to help Len into the operating tent. This is when his leg was amputated, and later he would have several eye operations, restoring his sight to a sorry, blurry mess.